I know the movie The Day of the Jackal is your dad's favorite, and he had a directive for you when you joined the show. But what is his review of season one? Is he pleased with the season?
Do you know what? He actually was. I mean, he saw it in real time as everyone else saw it, sort of week by week. And he sort of kept me on my toes a bit, but by the end, he fortunately enjoyed it thoroughly. But part of all of us making the series had great love and respect, both for the Frederick Forsyth book, but also the film, the Zinnemann film. And we tried in our own way to, while sort of updating it and setting it in an hour, kind of hopefully setting it apart from that, to infuse it with that love so that people who are fans of the original will find Easter eggs and, even sort of direct quotations both from the book and the film. So dad and some people who don't know the film will have no knowledge of that. It couldn't matter less, but my dad was appreciative of those things anyway.
Yeah, he told you don't fuck it up.
He
So
did tell me not
yeah.
to.
So he did not think you fucked it up. So
Yeah, unfortunately, exactly. He seemed to enjoy it. He's curious about what's coming up next.
was he thrilled that the jackal survived? Because he dies in
Yeah,
the movie.
definitely did not. Massive spoiler, but in the movie, the jackal is killed very abruptly at the end by the Michael Lonsdale character, and in our series, he doesn't. But we try to sort of, whilst inverting it, retain that kind of, because it's so shocking in the film is that you've sort of that the abruptness of it. We've tried to give a moment that equates to that, albeit the jackal survives.
I love your performance of the Jackal because he's such a fascinating character too. Because I think as people watch the show, like they find themselves rooting for him to be caught, but also they want him to get away with all the kills and
Yeah,
everything. I think you do such a good job of like threading the needle of like his two halves, basically. Like he's this quiet assassin, and he's so economical with everything he does, and so unbothered with everything, and he has so much control and conviction. But then there's all this stuff with his personal life and his wife and
yeah.
everything. And how did you tackle balancing those two sides of him? And like because like the personal stuff, like he's not really comfortable with addressing that, you know?
Yeah, the way in for me was that in some ways he is two different people. It was something that I'd looked into quite a lot when doing the Good Nurse film about a sociopath, Charles Cullen, and this idea that you can live these sort of parallel lives within oneself. And so, but interestingly, the thing that I found most challenging was that economy that you're talking about. There's something that is incredibly kind of refined and economic and ruthless about him. But that economy weirdly takes quite a lot of work. I'm like the least. I'm the most sort of flappable person imaginable, and this character is deeply unflappable. So it was weird because it meant that I had to prep. I like prep anyway, but I had to prep, I would say, fivefold to how I would normally, just on silly things. Like, I remember there's a moment in the opening scene the opening episode, when I sort of pull this dismantle this suitcase and turn it into a sniper's rifle, and I wanted it to be like a dance, and I wanted it to have the sort of cathartic satisfaction of everything fitting exactly in its right place. It took me weeks. I would just put classical music on. I would sit in the bedroom at the hotel I was staying at and just go over and over, trying to make it as fluid as possible.
Yeah, I mean, so much of your performance is about that stillness and micro movements and patience and focus. And you're also asking the audience to be patient too, like you said, just like assembling the
Mm.
rifle and everything. But I think that's also how you draw people in, but you're also a producer on it. So was this like a discussion point between you guys of like how exacting to make like his process and sh to show his process?
One of the things that drew me to this is that there was something analog about it. There was something that reminded me of those 70s thrillers, of those kind of early Bond movies that were about spycraft in some ways. They were about, and I love that. I love watching how things are made, and this idea that once you get to know the Jackal, you know that he's a chess player, so he's always thinking 7 moves ahead. But that as an audience, you get lured into uh, the creation of those moments, like the setting up of the dominoes, with the knowledge that you're going to get the catharsis of watching that sort of be flicked and the whole thing sort of unravel. And that was one of the things that appealed, was so that whether that was watching the gun be assembled or to really studying how the prosthetics are applied and removed. Craft is he is an artist in some ways, and that was something that Brian Kirk, our first book director, and Ronan Bennett and I really lent into, was the idea that if we're going to suspend the audience's imagination that this guy can create all this stuff himself, you've got to believe that he is, he has the manual artistic capacity for it.
I think the most flustered he get, which is not even that flustered, is in episode 9 at the end, on the boat when
Yeah.
he finally kills UDC, but a lot of variables there, the guy in the jet ski and everything, but still the same thing, like he's assembling the rifle and everything, and then he just takes care of business even when there are X factors that come into play. So what was it like shooting that scene? Because I do feel like that's the most intense scene
Yeah.
of the whole show there.
I'll tell you what was interesting about that scene is it was Ronan's idea that he basically, how do you find balance when you're on the water? And he thought the idea of using a Steadicam, the infrastructure of a Steadicam, was the way forward. And as actors, we often do Steadicam shots, and the Steadicam operators on film sets are the rock stars. They're the guys and girls who come on, and the camera's incredibly heavy, and if you do long takes, there's like a real cost to that physically on them. But I'd never tried one on until I did try one on for this, and my respect for Steadicam operators is now even more high than it was previously. They are, the balance and the engineering behind it was so intricate. So I spent a day or two working with this Steadicam operator and his camera, but it's all about balance, and it's a bit like it's an extension of your body. And so I learned the balance of this particular camera. Then anyway, we got to the day of shooting it on the boat, and it transpired that because of the weather had shifted, that Steadicam operator, he and his camera weren't available. So I had a totally new Steadicam, which completely threw me because the balance was all over the place. Honestly, it was the complications of weather. We only had 2 days to shoot all of that sequence, and the first day it was Croatia. It was heading towards sort of late autumn, and the weather was horrendous, and so we ended up having to try and cram all of it basically into one day. So when I see that scene assembled, I'm sort of astonished, and it's credit to Anu, our last doc director, that she managed to pull it off.
I think everyone watching was like thrilled and relieved that he did it. Like again, when I was like, oh, like I want him to accomplish, and he did it. Like it's
Yeah.
like down to the last bullet, basically.
But I think there's something about the other things that appealed to me was the structure of the piece, which is that you have Lashana's character, who is, in theory on the side of good, but is endlessly willing to compromise morally, and similarly, the Jackal is doing horrendous things, but actually at moments you perhaps are compelled by him. And the idea that these two people who are deeply flawed on a kind of trajectory towards each other, oscillating between where your favor is, I felt that was structurally an intriguing idea. And also that like the original film was very binary. It was like good versus evil, whereas every character in this felt like they had a sort of a blurriness to them, where it was UDC, who, the theory was doing something great with River of transparency, but at the same time had deeply autocratic kind of qualities to him. I enjoyed that blurriness.
We get the Jackal's backstory in the 8th episode of, what happened in Afghanistan. And I thought it was interesting because like there were still, elements of his cold-bloodedness there. Like he was still enigmatic, and, he does something after this mission gone wrong. And it shows that he has this like moral code to him. But like it's not a complete 180 from like, Alexander Duggan to like the Jackal now. So how did you approach that flashback?
There was a brilliant man called Paul Biddis, who was our military advisor on the piece. He's now like the most popular man in Hollywood. He did like Gladiator, he did The Agency. We're very lucky to have him, but he has experienced a lot of this, and he was very intricate with the detail of whether it was the moment when you surreptitiously see him press a button on the car just as he's heading off to go and sort of search for the explosion or for the mine. All of these details he delivered with them to us, and it layered the thing up. Then it was really that episode, our director Paul and our brilliant cinematographer Dale. It was a dance between us. We were just I remember the moment of going to look for the mine. We just did in real time in Pag, this dumbfounding island in Croatia that looks like the moon. And it was a sort of good 20-minute sequence that I think Hurt Locker style experience, but it was also, cut right down. One of the things that I loved about the series is it felt like lots of different films. It took me to completely different places, both character-wise, sort of language-wise, but also location-wise. It was consistently very. Yeah, I'd always been jealous of actors who got to do those things, who go on those sort of slick outfits and beautiful locations. And
now this is you. It's the Jackal.
I lucked out.
Well, UDC was supposed to be the Jackal's final kill, and then he was supposedly supposed to retire, but then he's forced to kill this elderly couple, Liz and Trevor. And I feel like those are two kills that he regrets. Like, he was genuine when he said he wasn't going to kill them.
Yeah.
But how do you think those kills affected him?
Well, I think that everything about the Jackal is about putting the work in beforehand in order that failure isn't an option, and the plan is foolproof. And of course, what happens is someone that is deeply controlled, and there is a sort of tightly woundness to him that is at the core of who he is. And gradually over the series, we've watched that become unraveled. And I really enjoyed working on those last two episodes as the character began to spin out and his moral code was sort of questioned. And it's, this moment when Ursula, who plays Nuria, makes him call himself out, like tells him, you kill people for money, and makes him repeat it, and says to him, listen, like, you're not listening, like, to connect those two parts of himself, because I believe that he sort of hasn't. I really enjoyed those last two episodes, and I particularly loved working with those actors who are just glorious. I got to work with some really brilliant actors on this one.
Yeah, that scene when Nuria makes him say, I kill people for money, it was so incredible, because he starts off just whispering it, and he's a man of few words anyway. But then she, like you said, like, she forces him to repeat it and say it louder and louder, and he eventually screams it in her face. So what's it like for you to shoot that too? Because that's basically the loudest you ever get on the show.
It was, that was a scene that Ursula and I worked on with Anu, our director, for a long time. It was a challenge to find what that scene was. We had worked for months because there are so many times where she goes, Nuria's going, come and tell me the truth, come and tell me the truth. And so this moment of actually having it was a big one. But again, what was so joyful is she is such a brilliant actor, and we ended up improvising in the moment of those and pulling the whole thing apart. And there's just this line the morning after where she goes, what did you think it would happen when you told me this? And he goes, well, I never thought about it. And she just ups and leaves and says, I need a coffee. It's just something that completely dismantles it. And it was Ursula's sort of improvisation that it's just, but again, for me, the joy of this series was the variety of it. I got to do sort of action, I got to do all that makeup-y, shifting stuff, and then some moments of quite meaty drama.
It does feel like, he had the arrogance to believe he could continue leading this double life, like, no worries. But then in the finale, I do kind of feel like he probably knows Nuria has left him when he's trying to make his way home.
Yeah.
You think so too?
I think so too. I think there's a sense But then when he gets there and it's happened, I mean, I think you see this darker side of him, which is it's not just about controlling himself; it's about controlling other people. And that bit in the car when he's leaving her a message, there's something pretty monstrous there. As if he's not a monster generally, but but I think he deeply loves her. You know, I think this is a man who had believed that he was going to have one life, and that was one of complete solitude. And then, of course, the Achilles heel was meeting her and having the arrogance to believe that he could have both.
But you and Lashana don't meet until that very moment, the face off, and it's so brief. What was it like rehearsing that scene, and then even the aftermath of after the jackal killing her? Like he goes over to her body, and I thought that was so poignant because like they are like you said earlier, like they are kind of similar to each other. Like they're both
Mm,
addicted to the work,
mm,
and it was almost like he was like paying respect to her.
mm.
Like he didn't want to kill her, but it's like he had to.
I think he did respect her hugely. I think he knows his own brilliance, and the fact that her tenacity, and that even remotely by never meeting her, he has great um, respect for her talent. Honestly, it was such an interesting job this because Lashana and I we met once in the gym before we started while we were training before we started shooting, and then we were basically on set twice over maybe 8 or 9 months. Our friendship was forged. We were both producers on the piece, so it was really formed through the sort of producing element of it. And we would be shooting, 2 units at the same time. Lashana would be in London, I'd be in Budapest or in Croatia, but I have so much respect for her, and also, yeah, for both of us, it was the first time producing and have facility as a producer. So many of the in so many areas, but particularly like music, she comes from a very musical background and her instincts. Like for example, Celeste, who sings the opening credits, that was Lashana's suggestion. There were so many. She could talk to the music supervisor in a language that I just couldn't understand, but it really elevated the piece in a really brilliant way.
I do want to talk about the prosthetics because they are incredible, especially the premiere. Like you're introduced as this like senior citizen German janitor,
Yeah.
but we also get to see you take off the prosthetics in the episode. Again, like so meticulous and intricate. So what went into filming that? Like you removing everything? Because I feel like we often see actors behind the scenes like getting the prosthetics put on and the makeup
Mm,
and hair
mm,
trailer, but like
yeah.
here we see you take it off in the show.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, this was all the things that interest me. Like I know it is very much a cliche in this sort of genre of the moment of the sort of mask reveal. As we began to prep this, and Brian, our director, was, his truth is important to him. I made sure I had 4 months of proper prep time, and we worked with our makeup designer Mel, brilliant prosthetics designer Richard. And so the way it would work is he would come up with ideas, sort of photographs, images. There would then be discussion with the costume designer Natalie as well, because all of these departments, to make something work as a character, you all have to be in concert with each other. And I feel that sort of my role in the middle of that is so whether it's the dialect, the language, but also where your voice sits, because the prosthetic can look great, but if it doesn't marry with the kind of chain smoking voice, the whole thing doesn't work. So we did a lot of testing. And as we were testing, I kept saying to Richard, he would bring in some tools and I'd be like, can I take a photo of your toolbox? Or he would do a 3D scan of my head and bring in this kind of amazing scan that he would then sculpt onto. And I'd be like, can I take a photo of that scan, the sculpture that you, and I would send all these images to Brian and to our designer, Richard. And we would try and incorporate all of these things into his layer. Richard, our designer, had this beautiful old box of tools, which were the clay tools that he would use. And so, Richard, our production designer, brought that into his thing. So all of that stuff was important. And then Mel, our makeup designer, said, let's have this moment of the removal be real so that it can pay respect to what an art form this sort of is. And it was also when I read the script, I was like, these first few scenes are so vital if we can persuade an audience or have them questioning it at least, then I think we'll have them on side. But it was a high wire.
I do have two notes on the Jackal. He does not seem to be a great driver because he got into multiple car accidents, and he's not great at the bookkeeping. Like he never gets paid for his jobs. So my suggestion for season two, maybe he should get a chauffeur and a business
Right.
manager. What do
Yeah,
you
I think both of those are wonderful suggestions. You may not be the first to have suggested them. There's definitely a moment. There was a moment with the driving when I was like, yeah, this guy. But to be fair, there was a kid walking across the street. What was he to do?
But the
But
second one, like
yeah,
but that one was more like, oh, like maybe this, like he died here, like
I know. Well, he was taken away. That he was taken away by looking at the birds. He loves bird watching. He was sort of in his own romantic moment. So I stop picking holes in the.
But then like he's not paid. I
No,
don't
he's
think it's
never
about the
paid. No,
money.
no.
I think it's just a principle. He doesn't need the money. He has that
Yeah,
house.
no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, seriously, like, God, he should pay up. But I do think one of the things we endlessly challenged was, is this really his last job? And that people, and I think lots of actors are the same in that it's not just a job, it's an addiction, and I sort of was trying to imagine the Jackal sitting in his beautiful villa with his, wonderful wife and daughter and son, and, overlooking all of the Mediterranean Spain with his feet up on a book. I just can't imagine him doing it. I think that there is that idea of peace is something that we aspire to, but I think often that the creating something is an addiction. So I think, however much money he's got paid, it's the idea of people letting him down, I think, that drives him.
Well, lastly, what can you share about season two? We know he's searching for Nuria and obviously still has the unpaid debt for
Yeah,
BBC.
yeah.
What can you share?
I could say very little other than I've just read um, the some of the first script of the series, and it's got me so excited to jump back in. I'm hoping that we can, you know, push the intricacy of who the character is with all of the scale and some of that stuff I was talking about, the kind of meticulousness and the domino stuff, even further. It's an exciting time. It's the first time that I've gone back to something in television, and I didn't know whether that was going to feel restrictive or but I just feel so buoyed, and I feel really lucky. It's rare as an actor that you get to coincide with a character that just like thrills you, and so I'm not taking that for granted.